consent agenda, and we do have an equalization hearing at this meeting. Any questions on that at all? All right. Anything of any equalization that's odd?
Same.
All right, public hearings. Let's do B1.
All right, B1 is simply checking a box required by Florida statutes to update our comp plan to have our water policies in the plan be consistent with the Central Florida Water Initiative rule. This is really more soft planning items like conservation and committee to explore alternative water supplies. Nothing that would affect our water permit or anything like that. We are going to have a very substantive alternative water supply workshop in a couple of weeks where you'll get all the substance and policy that you want on that. But this itself is simply complying with some requirements of Florida statutes. Ruffin, did I gloss over that too much, or is that?
No, that's a good synopsis. Okay. Very good.
And it's important. City Manager, CSX.
Good morning.
Good morning,
everyone.
sir.
Good to see you.
By the way, great parade last night.
It was a fantastic parade last night.
This morning.
The staff did a tremendous job. I was at South Florida and Orange, and we had two of our sanitation trucks parked there for security, and the drivers were there, so it was good to see them, and all the staff did a fantastic job. It's amazing how much happens and just pops up in a day and then is gone the next morning, so everybody does a fantastic job. Appreciate all of staff's efforts on it.
Plus, just the protection of the crowd, by the way, everything was set up was really wonderful to see, and to avoid incidents that have happened in other places. And so thank you so much for all that.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate those comments, and staff has done a great job with the parade and certainly with those heightened security concerns that everyone has. I have one item this morning, and it's regarding recommendation for a change order with CSX Transportation. Previously, the city had entered into a construction agreement with CSX, and it was for the widening of the rail crossing at County Line Road at US 92. At the time, CSX had estimated $700,428 would be the cost. The crews from CSX have already begun work on the track, and now CSX has presented a revised construction estimate to the city in the amount of $821,635, which is a little more than $121,000 increase, and that is the result of additional flagging services that they need on the job site, and also signal and communication equipment and increased cost for that equipment. And so staff will be recommending approval from the City Commission for a change order with CSX.
Any comments, questions? Keep moving. City Attorney, A1.
All right, A1 is the first reading of an ordinance for PUD rezoning of Morgan Creek Phase 2. I think it's being called Gresham Trails now, to permit 321 single-family houses on approximately 130 acres. This is just west of the existing Morgan Creek development out there. Teresa.
So for context, the property that is being considered for the change now forms what is shown as tracts B and C in this overall development plan, which was adopted when the PUD was first approved back in 2004. Tract A is what is known as Morgan Creek Phase 1, which consists of 133 lots. And overall, the approval was for 355 lots within A, B, and C. To the north of Phase 1 is what is known as Tracts D and F. And Tract F has its own approvals, and that is for 74 dwelling units within that tract. So again, we're just looking at B and C with this change. And what is proposed is the new lot layout that would basically remove the connection between Phase 1 and then this new Gresham Trails development, so thereby making it an independent development. The conditions that are recommended would require that it have its own HOA, and that all of the amenities be specific to this development as well, and not tied to any amenities within Phase 1 of Morgan Creek. Other changes that are contemplated with this site plan would be the introduction of smaller lot sizes. So today, there is a minimum of 5,500 square foot lots in the other phases, and this would bring those down to a minimum lot size of 5,400 square feet, so 100 square feet less than what is the minimum today, with a lot width of 45 feet, and that would be uniform throughout the development. Other things that would occur with this would be a buffer on the western side of the development. Here. There's a natural vegetative buffer there today of an existing stand of oak trees. The property owner to the west was concerned about future development of his property, which has residential land use, and making sure that there was a sufficient buffer in that area. So the way the conditions were presented is to retain that natural vegetative buffer, and then also to enhance it with additional landscaping so that within 3 years it provides 90% view blockage at a minimum height of 6 feet. So other than that, there are some substantial transportation conditions, one of which you've probably heard quite a bit from the public, and that deals with the potential for a future connection across Morgan Creek and to what has previously been shown as Tract E within the planned unit development. And within that Tract E, it's important to note that since 2004, there's been a condition in the PUD that specifies that Tract E is reserved for future development, and that the maximum number of dwelling units in Tract E shall be subject to modification of this PUD. That's been in there, and it will remain in there if this modification is approved.
So that can be addressed later.
So that any units or entitlements within that Tract E will be addressed later. What is also currently shown within the concept plan or the overall master plan for the development is a future connection to the north towards Medela, and then this is where it shows the future development, and then a potential creek crossing here. So the conditions as they're written basically lay out the timing for when that connection would be needed, and also making sure that there is a stub out provided to allow for that to occur. So it's always been contemplated. The conditions now just more clearly define how that will occur.
Teresa, what stub out? Can you explain that?
Sure. Can we go back? So stub out meaning that the roadway will be constructed to a point north of this roundabout here, and then you'll see it's literally ended at a point, but set up in a configuration that it can be extended at a future time. So it won't be constructed beyond this point until there's development that occurs to the north.
Okay.
Yes, Commissioner Mann.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Teresa. So when you talk about addressing the entitlements later, but then you also said that this particular thing has the timing already kind of delineated. So what does the timing say?
So the conditions are that, and Chuck can correct me here on this, but that with the first plat, that this connection needs to be shown for the first plat for this development. So they need to include this stub out and showing the potential for it to be extended to the north. The timing of this development is dependent upon that property owner coming in and seeking entitlements for it. And as a reminder, that's showing the bump on the west there. That Tract E had come in earlier this year for a modification. You'll recall the discussions on that, and was denied, primarily because of the concerns with flooding in the area, and then also traffic if this development only had access onto Medela via the parcel to the north of it. which is one of the reasons why the conditions now go into great detail of explaining how that connection through B and C will accommodate cross-connection up to E, so that E can then be distributed to the south down to Pipkin, as well as to the north onto Medela. But that doesn't occur with this change. It still requires that tract E come in at some future point and ask for a modification to the PUD.
And on the flooding side, do you have a question on that?
So I just want to be sure, like, so timing, this obviously has to be stubbed out for potential development, which could be 20 years from now. There's no, like, big plan to do this in 2025, like that kind of timing specified?
We don't know the intent of the property owners, but certainly there's no pending application.
Okay, and when you say that this is a new development with a new HOA, is it a different developer?
It is the same developer today who has indicated that there are multiple builders looking at this property. We don't have any documentation of any contracts with those developers, but we have been told that there are several builders looking at this
So it's
property.
a possible flood.
Yes, their intent, as they've told us, is to sell it to the builder and then be able to eventually then, with this development having its own HOA, turn over phase one to its residents.
So when they sell it to the builder, does this property convey the tract E?
No, tract E.
Separate property?
Correct.
Totally addressed separately, so we can look at all of the issues, this property fraught with the flooding, traffic mitigation, all that. And can you show on the map where the property is contiguous with any county property?
It is, so this red line here is city limits. So this is county, and this is county.
Okay, so just to me, every chance I get personally, when we talk about anything out in that area, I think it's important to point out the anxiety and the difficulties that we have when we're dealing with properties that are county, city, working together, just kind of the standards that we've had that have differed in the past, and, going forward to make sure that we don't have the flooding and the traffic concerns that, we feel would be immediate if there was development on their property. So thank you for just giving us the context and showing us again that area that was denied in the past, and remind, because if it's a different builder, then they might not know the history. And so I think it's incumbent upon us to make sure that we remind folks, of the history and where we are, so that we don't put a developer or a builder in a precarious position, not understanding, where we are, in that area. So.
And certainly if we are approached in the future by that property owner or a prospective buyer, will convey those concerns to them so that they know up front, before they get into the process, that they're going to have to address those issues.
And then my last comment is on the 45-foot lot size. You're feeling like everyone's comfortable with that's the new normal?
Yeah, well, 40s have become the new 50s, we like to say.
Thank God, I'm almost 50.
Yeah.
I just celebrated my 40th.
What are we doing with 60-foot lots?
So as far as it providing still a significant lot area, yes, we are comfortable with that. And the fact that it's not immediately adjacent, those lots aren't immediately adjacent to the existing lots in phase one. Go back here.
Yeah, because that's important.
There's a significant buffer here with this wetland area.
And I wanted to thank you also for reaffirming the fact that this is not going to impede on the amenities of phase one, which was a prior concern with regard to the recreational area in Morgan Creek. Okay, thank you.
And then Chuck did prepare also a slide reinforcing the need for connectivity and having that connection to the north. And Chuck, if you want to run through these.
Oh, sure. And this is something that certainly the commission has talked about in the past, and as we grow in West Lakeland, is just making sure that we're not pushing all of the traffic onto Medela or Pipkin or Ewell or those roads. And so The intent here is to provide better connectivity for everybody in the Hamilton-Mandela Road corridor to, say, the new public shopping center, the new city park. Likewise, this would shorten the distance from Fire Station 7 to tracks B and C. So, I mean, there's some real benefits to that. Pipkin Road is a designated Type 1 roadway, so we require cross-connectivity anyway. And so without the connection to Phase 1, we need to figure out a way to have that cross-connectivity. And so this is a way to do that. And then everything still has to go through formal, engineering analysis, permitting, approvals by the county as well, if we were to ever actually move forward with something to the north of Mandela Roads. There are a lot of steps in the process before anything would be built, and certainly on the city side and the county, everybody's aware of the issues around the Mandela-Hamilton intersection and are ready to address those. But what we want to do is not preclude the ability to make that connection in the future, because we do need a grid network out here.
So it's stubs for, but it have to be approved and.
Exactly. And this zoning action has a specific requirement for an engineering analysis for that crossing, so that, we want Public Works to, be involved. We want others to take a look at it to make sure that crossing is feasible. Very similar to what was done down in Riverstone with the bridge between phases 3 and 4. So it's that same type of.
Very good. Commissioner Music.
So, and I wasn't on the commission during the last, would you mind going back to the one that shows all of the tracks? Because like all of you have been getting, some of those emails. So the entity that applied for E and was denied because of whatever, flooding, connectivity and things like that. I mean, obviously if we're going to have them building the ABC and having the connectivity, they're paying attention, they're going to resubmit. I mean, there's a value in property other than just sitting there. But if we have flooding issues, I mean, every time we build a road or build a development, we're bringing it up, right? I mean, the roads are not going to be at virgin level, they're going to come up. So what mitigation is done to not continue to push more of that water, say, towards Track E? How are they handling that?
I'll look over, of course, at Public Works to make sure I'm not saying anything out of school, but when the last zoning proposal came forward, that developer's engineer had come up with plans to better convey the water, to better store or attenuate the water. It was going to solve all the existing issues out there, but it was going to make the situation a little bit better, even with that new development. And so that's something that we would get into more detail on in terms of, we've got a lot of water that's still coming from the north, and so the intent here is to certainly not make the situation worse, but ultimately we still need to figure out what to do in the Hamilton Road corridor.
Right.
Because as that water comes down from Drainfield, that's really seems to be a big part of the issue. But certainly through this process, we don't want to make this development create additional problems that exacerbate the existing.
Well, because as we get people that reach out to us and say, hey, you guys didn't allow E, but they look at this as part of the contingency, and then we're going to create a stub. I mean, again, someone look at the stub and say that's heading right towards Track E. You wouldn't create a stub if you didn't have the intention, sure. Which we obviously have the intention at a certain point to at least review it. So,
and even with Track D being developed, there's still an intervening property, the 10 acres that has to develop between Track D and Mandela Road for that to happen. So, I mean, there are multiple steps.
Gotcha. Okay.
So there's Manila up there above subject property.
This is the intervening property.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Commissioner Mann.
Thank you. So I was also just curious. So like when you're going for matching dollars or funds or prioritization of roadway projects with DOT, is it similar to like at the airport, how we don't just get FAA money because we want it or because we have these future dreams. It's based on how many flights per day and how many, planes and what kind of planes we're flying out of there to get the money. And, I've seen Gene Conrad, expertly kind of navigate that. Like, oh, if we get customs, then we need this tall of a tower, and then if we get that, then we can get this company, we can get a longer runway. Similarly with our traffic going forward with growth. Even Chuck, how we thought the traffic was going to go to New Tampa Highway, and then, there was more over in Drainfield, so then we kind of had to advocate to move some of those funds over. You can't necessarily have a crystal ball and predict where the growth is going, but certainly this area is growing, and it's
predictable.
Yes. So how would we prioritize Hamilton Road? Do these additional homes immediately have this build out, to Commissioner Music's point? Does that help us to show, like, it's not just hypothetically this development is going to build, but right now we need housing, it's coming, it's building. Does that help us? Because to his point, we don't want to just impede progress or development. We just want quality development, and we want to take the consideration of the neighbors, flooding issues, certainly as a high priority. So does this development kind of position us better to have Hamilton Road and all the surrounding roads fortified?
I believe that it helps, but frankly, I think Hamilton Road's best position is because of the proximity to the airport itself, and because of the non-residential that's developing in that area between Drainfield and ultimately down towards Medela Road, is that position is for economic development funds, intermodal funds through DOT, because of the direct connection to the airport. The additional housing and the connectivity to kind of that cross connectivity with plum and retail ultimately also helps if we need additional dollars through the TPO, through the traditional set of funds that they prioritize on an annual basis. And so I think Hamilton Road is already important, and the counties recognize that, the cities recognize that because of the connection to the airport. It's woefully substandard today. And so things need to happen today just to serve what is in the pipeline without the residential. With the residential, we do have some additional ability to, I think, make a case that Hamilton is part of a much bigger, even bigger network than what we're saying today. It also has I think, a much stronger benefit of taking local traffic off of County Line Road, because as we see much more development on both sides of County Line Road, particularly truck traffic, we really don't want to mix car and truck traffic, on a high-speed corridor. So this provides, in essence, a baggage road that, frankly, we were not able to achieve down at the public shopping center, because as you start working north towards Medela there are some concerns about being too close to the bridge and site visibility and everything else. And so the residential development north of Publix will have the connection to Medela. This kind of replaces that and moves it further east so that we can continue to provide a conductor route parallel to county line. It's also important about the plan, if it ever comes to fruition and that connection is ever made, is it directly aligns with the Hawthorne Mills spine road that runs from Pipkin to Ewell. So we can end up connecting Ewell to Pipkin to Medela to ultimately Drainfield through multiple developments, and we just do that as opportunities arise, as developments come forward. And so all we're trying to do here is position ourselves to do that, but not also preclude the ability to do that in the future and go, gosh, we lost an opportunity. But I think that when it comes to Hamilton, it makes a stronger case that it serves a larger traffic need than even just connections to the airport.
Well, and I would just love, as a talking point for us when because we're in a radical growth period. It's one thing if nothing's developing. You don't need these talking points. But when people say, I'm investing all this money and you're getting all these property taxes, why doesn't that solve, for X, whether that's traffic or flooding knowing the funding sources for the particular mitigation that is necessary in an area, whether it be, working with the county or whether it's flooding or whether it's traffic, there's all these, concerns as we develop this area. I think people just think, well, I'm bringing money to this area. That money should help support all of these things. But just because their island of, development is, appropriate with all the, flooding mitigate inside that, I feel like it's important for us to see how do these roads get paid for. We've talked about, with that gas tax shrinking and things like that. How does all of this, become what we hope it will become, as we move forward. And to try to say that in a simplest, form to residents who live there and also to the builders who are investing. And we're thrilled, that they're investing. We need housing, but just because they're investing a certain amount of dollars in a project doesn't mean that magically all of the supporting infrastructure and city services or county services are available. So am I making sense in my request, just to kind of see how we articulate that to developers? Because certainly I would say, are a pro-development commission. And know we need housing, but we just want to make sure that we are not doing it at all costs and look back and say, my goodness, what did we do? It's a wreck out there. So,
And something on the funding side too that it's been probably the past 5 or 6 years that we're having to be more careful of is that, all the, Pipkin, Medalla, Hamilton, Drainfield, those are all county roads. And so now that we have 2 completely separate ordinances between the city and the county, anything impact fee related on those roads would have to come from the county. What we would do is help on our facilities, over time out here, which there really aren't that many today. It's just what's being built and conveyed to the city. So there's some funding nuances that we need to work through on the local side, and maintenance. That's been an ongoing issue, and probably what we'll end up doing. And this is a good example. So if it doesn't serve a greater public purpose, we don't want to take ownership of it. It'll be a privately maintained road, and so that's something with tracks B and C. Those are going to be private. The main spine road will be public, and so we're trying to minimize the amount of new roadways that are being added because gas tax that's ends up funding most or all of the maintenance, and with that shrinking, that becomes a bigger issue down the road. And so there's some things that we'll lay out that better communicate that and how that works.
And in fact, this is putting the burden on the developer for that alignment and for a stub as possible. And that's an important thing to communicate as well.
Exactly.
Right. Commissioner McLeod.
Thank you, Mayor. Teresa, are a lot of the concerns that we've heard on this related to Track E and the possibility of opening up to that? Or it seems like that's still, even though that's not under consideration, that's on a lot of the neighbors' minds.
So there's been a mix of concerns that we've heard at the Planning and Zoning Board level, and then also through subsequent emails that have come through from residents. So yes, those residents in unincorporated Polk County are concerned about what this means for Tract E. But then the existing residents in Tract A and Morgan Creek Preserve, they obviously don't have a good relationship with the developer who still controls the homeowners association. So their concern is, there's a lack of trust there. And, despite zoning conditions, that they will lose the ability to utilize their amenities. So that was a primary concern from those existing residents. So in this zoning action, what we did is reinforce a condition that addresses those recreational amenities that essentially says what's there today in Morgan Creek Phase 1, Morgan Creek Preserve, those amenities as depicted today on the site plan and the PUD need to remain. Because I think there is that fear that somehow the developer may come in and remove portions of it and want to use it for other uses.
And try to create one amenity area within the entire section.
Of Phase 1, yes.
Yeah, but there's a fear that they would try to just remove the one that's currently there and create one for the entire. That's the reason for having that provision, that it has to stay.
Right. And then there was the fear that this new Gresham Trails would have use of the amenities in Phase 1.
So that's why no connector.
Right. So that's why that road connection is eliminated, and then it calls for its own amenity center within tracks B and C.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Anything else? All right.
All right, so this is good. This is going to be first reading on.
You wait. Commissioner Reed has one. Yes, sir.
I have a big history of that property. Maybe I can shed some light on some of it. But anyway, to answer something, there's no public utilities to the north. So it's going to be a while because there's no water sewer coming down Medalla Road at this point. I know we've got some water planned to come down that, but there's no sewer in the immediate future to my knowledge. You may know something different than I do. But, Is that a fair statement?
So tract E, when it had come in previously,
I'm talking about Medella Road, Medella Road. And of course, the intent originally, when we had originally put this together, we were going to come through and E was going to run through and come out on Pipkin Road. It was never going to go all the way through. That's my preference anyway. I don't want it to go to Medella Road and impede any more we have to and put traffic on towards the airport, stuff like that. Because we all know Hamilton Road, I don't think you can get two cars through there side by side unless somebody's pulling over. And of course, we're getting ready to build a substation on the northeast corner of, the southeast corner of of Hamilton and Pipkin right now. It's going to be a fire substation for on that land we already have there. But I applaud the way they're doing it right now, and it's going to be interesting. It's going to be expense to go across. That's English Creek coming through there, and that's a wet area, so they're going to have some expense to do that. And I think the big retention pond there is not, even though it's a big one, I don't think it's in a wet pond right now, to my understanding. I haven't been there in a long time. It surprised me that the guy down there in the bottom corner with the RE3 in that right there, I don't know if that's even developable, that little bitty RE3 piece. We're going to put the buffer, that little corner piece, because the overpass there's, and that English Creek comes through, and it's wet, real wet.
looking at the aerial, there does appear to be some upland area that would be developable, but how much of that, I don't know.
Right. But to answer your question, it's going to be a little while, but obviously I would think the intent is for them to come through and go to the north and pick up that and try to avoid, I would recommend they try to avoid putting that extra traffic onto Medella Road, but I'm only one of a few, so, but.
Well, I think it's important to recognize that the commission's concern on this conversation has been A. It hasn't been on what we're talking about, improving in B and C. And it's not, and so we see this, I think, as it being aligned with what people want in the Morgan Creek side. It's just that's a long-term concern and a coordination with the county that we're going to have to make sure we're addressing.
Tracking is tied up by a total different entity now, and they're not going to relinquish that position until, I guess, the first quarter of next year. So it'll have to be done, something be done then, I guess.
All right, yes.
I just a point from some of the emails that we've been getting is that, they're hearing a little bit of information or they're seeing something in the paper and getting nervous, so they're reaching out to us. And the amount of information I've gotten just in the last half hour has certainly helped to be able to translate that on. And the joiners actually attend my church, so they pick my ear on occasion. So I told them just buy it. I said, buy it so you don't have to worry about it. He didn't, so now I'm going to keep talking to him. But
Well, he was just wanting you to give him the money.
yeah, he probably was. Good luck.
No, that's all right. And we understand. And if you've lived in that area, I remember sitting on that front porch of their house 22 years ago, and when there wasn't anything out there. Yeah. And you certainly understand the concerns. And we have a drainage problem that's going to have to get addressed. That's the bottom line. Okay, next.
All right, next item is an ordinance ratifying the annexation of a couple of properties into Lakeland Area Mass Transit District's boundaries. As you've heard before, the process is that LAMTAD first adopts a resolution approving an annexation, and they always do that with the property owner's consent. So we have that here, and then it ultimately has to be ratified by the City Commission by the adoption of an ordinance. Chuck, I believe you have a couple of slides of where these properties are.
Exactly. The first one, thanks, Palmer. The first one's at the culvert site in North Lakeland. They're at the intersection of US 98 and Harbor Drive. So it immediately abuts the district on the east side of US 98. But this is between Lakeland Square and Walmart on the west side of US 98. And then the second one is down at Sterapack's site in Parkway Corporate Center. They're in the process of getting site plan approval for a 50,000 square foot building on basically the eastern half of that overall tract. their existing operations on the west side, and they've purchased a lot on the west and are developing that as a warehouse and an office building. So that's should be under construction in the very near future, and so they're bringing their entire both parcels in to annex into the transit district. And so these are the only two that we have at this point. There'll be a few more, in upcoming months, but these are the two on the agenda for Monday.
Commissioner McCarley, anything?
Just concurrency. I mean, it's just helpful.
Okay. All right, next.
Next is a resolution ratifying the equalization role in formal resolution. The next item is a resolution vacating 3 different old platted easements that bisect basically a block just to the west of the Lakeland Auto Mall. All of our utilities have been polled, and none of them have any objections. There aren't any facilities in these particular easements, so that's recommended for your approval.
On that.
The third item under resolutions is a resolution expressing the City Commission's continued support for the construction of a bicycle pedestrian overpass over New York Avenue, I believe it is.
Yes.
That's something that Chuck's been working on with the FDOT, and they're asking for, a new commitment by the City Commission. So, Chuck, I'll let you describe that a little bit.
Oh, thanks, Bob. I'll try to grab the baton back from you. Thanks. There we go. So many of you have seen this one before. As part of the Polk Rail study, one of the short-term rail mitigation projects that came out of the overall effort about 10 years ago, in addition to the quiet zone, were a couple of pedestrian overpasses in the downtown Lakeland area. So he started to go through, do additional analyses. There was a lot of pushback on an overpass in Mont Park, so the City Commission recommended a no-build or asked for a no-build alternative there. We had continued to have New York Avenue and then Lake Mirror on the radar screen, but when the Intermodal Center site, preferred site, moved over to RP Funding Center, the Lake Mirror location ended up at least not being needed for connection to the Intermodal Center, which left us with New York Avenue. And so DOT is in the process of designing a pedestrian overpass. They had looked at an underpass at this location, but because of the jet fuel line that runs within the CSX right-of-way, the construction cost on that would have been about $10 million. And so from a cost feasibility standpoint, it was a lot easier to go above than try to turn under. And so the corridor as it stands right now would directly connect the New York Avenue cycle track on the south side at Main Street and then connect over to Lakewire Drive on the back side of the post office. It's important because of the need to connect to the Florida Tile property on the west side of Lakewire, ultimately to help provide better connectivity to Box Springs Park. And then, of course, DOT is studying West Lake Hunter Trail to the south. And so what we're trying to do is put together a west side trail system that goes through downtown, would connect these amenities to the west, connect to the North Lakewire neighborhood and the neighborhoods north on Martin Luther King Avenue, and also to provide better connectivity to the Intermodal Center. We're about 1,000 feet west of that. So as DOT is continuing through the design phase, we've been working very closely with Public Works and the CRA on, what should this look like, what kind of treatments should we put on the structure itself so that it more or less blends in with the downtown environment. Because this is going to be a big structure with switchbacks and other things to be able to accommodate pedestrians and bicyclists from an ADA standpoint. The structure, DOT put together a rendering, if you were standing at the Missouri crossing, this is what the structure would look like. And so as we get buildings that develop on either side, it will be fairly well hidden except for the crossing there over the rail line. And because of the restrictions that CSX puts on what occurs over their right-of-way, we're fairly limited in terms of what that structure can look like. It'll be almost like a weathered steel look, something that will minimize or hopefully minimize maintenance costs long-term. So we don't have to keep going back to CSX to get approvals and pay for flagging costs and those types of things. But there will be a mesh cage inside that structure so that people can't throw stuff on the tracks and cause damage below. And so it's a pretty standard design from that standpoint. But one of the things we've been working very closely with the department's team on is how to address the south end here at Main Street and then the north end at Lake Wire. So I think what we're going to end up with is more of a rounded design so that it doesn't look so boxy and so institutional. And the more of the circular ramp system, so it'll be a lot easier for bicyclists to be able to go up and go down, and also minimize the amount of kind of dead space that would have to be maintained, swept, and cleaned over time.
Corners.
We'd probably end up with something that looks similar to that structure there. This is just an example the DOT provided us from stock photographs. But really, at this point, all the DOT is looking for is just a reaffirmation that the commission continues to support this project. Again, in terms of the aesthetic enhancements, we'd be looking at powder coating the railings, more of a kind of a black colored paint with a concrete stain sealer that would be applied to the surfaces that would be visible from the public. Anything above and beyond a standard DOT design falls on the municipalities or the maintaining jurisdictions to fund. And so the cost estimate at this point is between $70,000 and $75,000. But not knowing what the future would bring in terms of actual material cost, Public Works is programming $85,000 from the Transportation Fund to cover those aesthetic enhancements. There will be additional conversations as we move forward between the CRA and the LDDA about how to handle the ground level at Main Street and at Lakewire Drive to make sure that those fit in with development plans, kind of long-term in the downtown area. And then there will be a separate three-party funding agreement between DOTs, the CSX, and the city to address maintenance and air rights and those types of costs. At this point in time, the project is under design. Right-of-way acquisition is funded in the work program, but construction is not funded. The last resolution on this that was approved by the City Commission in 2017 asked that construction be put on hold until kind of the development in the surrounding area catches up, and I think we're at that point now. So the resolution that would be considered on Monday goes ahead and asks DOT to program the construction phase, basically at the earliest available opportunity. This would have to be funded through the Florida Rail Enterprise out of Tallahassee. District 1 in Bartow sends up rail recommendations to Tallahassee for review and approval each year. This is on that list. I don't think it's the top priority. I think County Line 92, frankly, some of the longer term plans there are starting to bump up as a higher priority. But it is on our local list for funding through the Florida Rail Enterprise. And so the intent is to get that programmed in the next 5 years.
So this is certainly a bird in the hand versus two in the bush. The one I would ask about is we had some discussion last time about how to enter at 5 points. Can you tie that in at all in terms of thoughts and scope?
I think that we can, and DOT will be here on Monday and their representatives. I think we can tie this into an overall larger plan that almost bookends the intermodal site, the Florida Tile site, and the Bonnet Springs site. But I think we do need to continue and maybe even have a separate action that says, a high priority of the City Commission is to make that connection between Lake Beulah and George Higgins Boulevard and get that on the record as well. And we can put something together.
Because there's height there, is tunneling under the track a possibility?
I think that's been the primary focus of, and I know Ryan Lazenby in Public Works is part of the roundabout design is looking at it in a little bit more detail.
I was going to say, we're working now with PGA, who's a consultant designing the roundabout, to do a study for us, provide some alternatives for that crossing there at 5 Points. We hope to have something to the city manager within the next week or so for his review and approval for them to go forward with that study. So then at least we have some idea of what the potential is, what kind of crossing it could be, and then that lends us better to be in a position to get DOT participation in that work.
Comes Commissioner McLeod.
Thank you, Mayor. Chuck, so when you talk about tying those projects together, and I like the way that sounds, so what does that look like? How do we do that?
Go ahead. and I'll just kind of throw out this our first suggestion is that we can put an additional kind of statement inside this resolution that says that that essentially that this is part of a network that would also include a crossing from Lake Buell to George Jenkins Boulevard to also serve Bonnet Springs Park, and that is also a high priority of the City Commission, subject to future funding requests to DOT. I mean, not to log this one down, but we can put language in there that states also clearly the intent to move forward with something at that location.
Yeah, I was wondering, does it make sense to have both in one resolution? I understand what you're saying, you don't want to bog it down, but if there's a way to look at this holistically from a big picture, not just a piecemeal approach, and to prioritize that as overall, these projects and why they're important, I think that makes sense.
And one of the things we've done here recently is that with because the Intermodal Center site moved from its previous location behind the LPD parking lot, we asked the TPO staff to switch out the Lake Mirror Overpass that's been on its priority list for several years now with that Lake Beulah crossing. And so what we can do is use that as a tie into another statement in this resolution to bring that more into the mix as well. So yeah, we'll work on some language to address that.
And Commissioner Mann.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Chuck. So, I mean, I feel like I'm channeling former Commissioner Scott Franklin, now our Congressman, on the bike path to nowhere here. You just think like of all the pinch points that we need money and funding for, it's difficult to prioritize this spot where I don't even know if anyone ever, rides their bike or travels. When you know that everyone is at Lake Mirror and the pedestrian high line sounded so exciting, bond-worthy in my opinion. And then with the pinch point at Lake Beulah trying to get over to the park. So, I know that we have money coming from the railroad, and so we have to use it and put it in the best place. I'm hopeful that people with this would ride on New York Avenue. I don't know if we've done any auditing on who rides on that little path, but so I think it's important to, again, like with talking points, I guess it's the marketing in me that thinks, how do we paint this picture that we've already spent all this money on this New York cycle track that, I don't know, does anyone ride on it?
It's not connected.
It doesn't go anywhere.
It's not connected.
But will it be broken before we get to connect it to anything? And then secondly, gosh, I want access to that park sooner than later. It's opening in the spring, or would love a pedestrian highline, with Lake Mirror. Just when you think about amenities that bring visitors and travelers and your residents to our downtown, you don't think about this. So I'm having trouble with it, but if it augments the money we've already spent on New York Avenue and future Lake Hunter, wouldn't we rather start on Lake Hunter? Yes, it's going to be awesome, but we have so many present needs right now, and it's very difficult to get dollars, Mayor.
Yes.
So I am just going to be the squeaky wheel on those other projects that have a much higher priority in my mind.
Commissioner McCartney.
So, Chuck, and I feel you on that whole, the bike path to nowhere thing. And I do know it's sort of like Field of Dreams, build it and they will come. So I do think it's kind of both. It's both, but we do have pinch points. But aren't our hands tied on certain, when you talk about rail funding out of the state of Florida, don't we have a lot of measurement and a lot of rubric that we have to fit within and guidelines that we can't arbitrarily, although we would like to as a commission, and I think this is part of communicating to our constituency, is that we have to communicate that these dollars come from specific places with specific goals and objectives in mind that we can't necessarily move about to best serve our area. So can you just talk about that a little bit?
Oh, absolutely. And this has been one of the big issues with this overpass is because it came out of the Polk Rail study, it had a already kind of a higher standing in Tallahassee as it related to directly mitigating the impacts of the additional freight traffic related to Sunrail and the rail yard in Winter Haven. So that's where, from a timing and production standpoint, we're pretty much locked in on continuing forward, in terms of this project, and not be able to move that money from here to another location, because ultimately it goes back into the pool of dollars in Tallahassee and doesn't necessarily come back to Lakeland. I think in terms of utility, and this was a concern that we had back in 2017 when the original resolution was approved was that, you're right, out there today, the cycle track doesn't connect to anything today, and that's where the Lake Hunter part of it is going to be critical. And we didn't have a lot of development. There wasn't much of an emphasis on the area west of Florida Avenue. Now with the emphasis on the downtown west, and particularly what we're seeing, on the west side of Lake Wire here, this is a good way to provide an immediate connection from that development site to our system downtown in Lake Hunter. And without that, I think that development and its mixed-use potential and the residential connectivity are very limited because you're surrounded on basically one side by a major highway and three sides by rail. So I think that from a timing standpoint, we're actually getting in a good place where that pedestrian overpass could be timed very well with Lake Wire, and we can start to see that connection, those connections be made and get more usage.
And at Lake Wire, can bikes ride on the path that's already there, or do they have to ride on the street?
We've got bike lanes that exist today, but Ryan in Public Works has developed some concepts that we would work into future planning efforts in Lake Wire that may look at more of a cycle track, more of a multi-use path. There's some different options that we can look at with Lake Wire because really that's still relatively underutilized, and we can bring that up to the same level as Lake Beulah or Lake Mirror or some of these others as well. Most of what we did with Lake Wire was just to keep everything within the existing curb line and basically keep it inexpensive. But as we start to invest here, then all of a sudden there's a need to dress up Lake Wire and see it fulfill its potential as well. So there are several steps to show that connectivity and actually get more usage on in this part of downtown.
So to add some emotions to this, if you can imagine jumping on your bike and riding across Lake Hunter, not on the side of it, but...
No, I know. I just walked on one in Atlanta this weekend. I'm like, this is my vision. I've got the vision.
It's good. And then riding in and connecting through downtown and going over and connecting to Monette Springs Park and doing it on your bikes, it rocks.
As long as you don't have to get hit by a car on Lake Wire because you're on the road and a skinny little bike trail that's with a lot of traffic. That's what...
The whole Lake Wire is going to get beautified as well, as you go through this. So it's going to be the connector corridor, which is why it's so important to get this done now, because otherwise we don't make that happen.
And
I'm done.
I think, to your point, Commissioner Madden, whatever we can do to paint that picture, Chuck, to show that, what potentially that would look like one day, is helpful. We get into these single projects that are important to the grand vision, but it's easy to lose sight of, we've got this short segment that currently we don't know if many people, if any, ride on it, but one day they might, if it's connected, and if you can go somewhere from one end of town to the other. So
be busy.
The more we can show that, I think the more we can advocate for it.
We'll work on that.
Okay. It is going to be such a wonderful way to connect through downtown and ride also down towards the joinery, and it's just really exciting. And then we connect to other cities.
I have one more question
Yes.
for you, Chuck. Actually, hey, the one in the overpass in Winter Haven that's goes over 544. Remember they opened that in 2012. Does that have the curved access, or is it straight? I can't remember. I've seen it.
It's just a straight. They had a lot more run to work with the Chain Lakes Trail, so it's just a straight overpass with no switchbacks or anything like that.
Okay.
And that was another one where, that overpass went in.
Yeah.
The one at 1792 in Lake Alfred hadn't been built yet.
Yeah.
And so that had to come next, and now they're working on connecting to Lake Alfred. So that took a while to move along, too. So those are the very same types of questions that they were having. It's just, it takes a while to get these incremental sections done.
Because ultimately, the Rails to Trails program from the state wants to connect all of this. So if you look at Fort Fraser over on 98, that was, people were not real bought into that initially, and now if you're out there, it's continual, just rhythm,
Right, it's seizing the moments when they occur. Commissioner Music.
So, my question is this: if we've got a section right now, New York section that's done, and we're talking about Hunter, and we're talking about all of these things, and we are talking about segments, at a certain point, we've invested as a city in a portion that. I don't know, do we do any kind of study to know if it's being utilized at all? Or, because I'm going to lean more towards Commissioner Madden's point. At a certain point, we're going to not have everything connected, but some of the early stuff that we built is going to need to be rehabbed or something like that. So do we have, I mean, I know when we're talking about DOT money and CSX money, and we're talking about that stuff, we're talking about a lifetime to be able to get some of that stuff. So how do we wrap, I mean, the vision is easy, right? You go to a place that already has this, or you think of Fort Fraser, I mean, you can access it now, it's easy to grab a hold of the vision. But to look at the vision over an X number of years is where it's difficult to look at the economic side of it, in my opinion. So, I mean, we're talking about my grandchildren using this, we're talking about it being,
You're going to
by
use
the
it in a
time the
wheelchair.
city manager is 60, what are we talking about here?
We're gonna have an EV wheelchairs, don't worry.
I mean, a little jazzy scooter, that's what you're going to.
But I mean, what are we realistically talking about here from, because if we have a section here and then we do a section over here and then those aren't connected, I mean, ultimately, like I said, the vision is awesome.
Yep.
But
I think we're looking
Reality.
at somewhere around 10 years. I mean, and that's frustrating for, I think, everybody involved is there's so many cool things that can happen to make that connectivity and get those elements in place, but because of the funding streams, it just takes a very long.
And I don't think, and I personally don't think that 10 years is that long in relation to this kind of thing from a development standpoint. But it's just, I remember, crossing that bike path, not really knowing much about it, and thinking, man, I guess I can run this red light. There's nobody here. I'm not going to hit anybody.
Turn around.
But maybe they're going up and back.
They're all making notes. They started laughing really hard.
But no, and that's I mean, because people ask us questions, right? And so it's to have a bigger handle on that vision of, so. Okay,
It looks idiotic.
Well, it does.
It looks idiotic.
If you've ever been to Oahu, they have, on the island, they have an overpass, kind of like the Selman, that goes from one side to the other, but you can't get off of it. It's been built, but it hasn't ever been finished, and it's decades old.
Okay.
Okay, so
Last,
Commissioner Mann.
promise, last, well, maybe, I won't promise, no promise, just, so, infrastructure money is coming. I mean, when do you say, we want to do something special, we think the property taxes are going to support it because we are in a rapid growth period, we want our pedestrian trail sooner rather than later, let's go ahead and bond something and knock it out. Can we do that?
Sure. We can turn around and say, let's do a couple parking lots, let's do some kind of pedestrian crossing connections, all those things, and address that on a bonding basis, but that's another discussion.
So can we put that on a strategic planning?
At another time.
At our strategic planning retreat?
Yeah, but that's something we ought to talk about this.
Pardon me?
Far away. Yeah, the next strategic planning retreat's end of February.
Yeah.
It's really probably where that belongs.
Yeah, let's talk about it. I mean, I know I can ask about bonding all the time, but we have money to support it. I'm looking at the Mr. Brosak down there who.
What's important now is for the two of you to bond.
I don't know bonding, we love each other, I just don't know if that means I can get money.
And we need DOT to also articulate their plan for the federal infrastructure funds as well, because, I mean, there's a lot that's coming in that's going to be controlled by Tallahassee and coming out. That's where, these are the types of projects as well, that the more that they hear through the TPO process and others, directly from the commission, that, what is your plan, state of Florida, on how to expend these billions of dollars? That could also help in anything that we generate here locally. We can use that to leverage and get even more investment at the state and federal level, but we need DOT to articulate.
And the value of this point, which is a wonderful point, is when you're growing a city at a predictably steady rate, we can grow it the way we've grown it in the past. When we recognize that we're going to have to that we are in a high growth period and that there are moments to seize in a good economic era, the need to do more aggressive steps to create the connections and the opportunity and the options that have to be funded governmentally or with private partnerships at some level, as in parking garages, so that everything else can be supported around them accelerates. And that's our job to balance. And I think we're moving in that direction in light of what other funds are available.
Well, and there's a big difference between just spending and investing.
Yes.
So.
You bet. So those are growth pressures, and it's exciting, and that's going to be one of the most important things we address in this next year together. Okay. Okay, next. Yes, it's just a nice light agenda study.
Yeah, good luck the next one.
It looks kind of short today, so we thought we'd add.
Use it. All right.
All right, well, as you know, LPD has been researching different options for body cameras, going back at least as far as last summer's budget discussions. And following adoption of the budget in September, they've finalized that analysis and have reached the conclusion that if the City Commission wants to adopt this program, that a contract with Axon Enterprises procuring a bundled solution is the way to go. And so a contract has been negotiated with Axon for your consideration. What you have before you is a 10-year contract to purchase 250 tasers, 250 body-worn cameras, which covers essentially every sworn law enforcement officer in the department, 165 in-car camera systems, 10 virtual reality training head systems, 3 interview room camera systems, as well as a number of other software and hardware items, and probably most importantly, an integrated digital evidence storage solution. Our purchasing department, in conjunction with LPD, has looked at what is available out there and has concluded that this qualifies as a sole source purchase because what Axon provides is the only thing that can be integrated. You can integrate the tasers with the body cameras, with the in-car system, with the evidence storage system. So that is being presented to you as a sole source contract. The contract would be for a fixed cost of $938,000 per year over a 10-year period. This is within, actually a little bit below what the budgeted numbers were that were presented to you in September. In September, between the payment to a third-party contractor and some internal costs, we were estimating the cost of the program at $1,080,354, at least for fiscal year 2022, and then going forward as well. With the agreement that has been negotiated and the city's internal costs associated with that, we're now looking at approximately $1,041,900. And it should also be noted that the numbers that were being considered in September were for the purchase of only 240 tasers, 200 body cameras, and 160 in-car systems. And this contract actually reflects significantly more units, 250 tasers, 250 cameras, and 165 in-car systems. So it is below budget and getting more assets for the value. Assistant Chief Lehman is here, and he can go through the technology and what it's going to provide, what it will do for us. So I'm going to turn it over to him.
Thank you.
Morning. Just like Palmer had mentioned, the initial talk was on body cams, and then upgrading all of our digital evidence system, getting it onto one platform is another key thing for us. So with Axon doing that, not only will we get the body cams, we're getting an upgrade in our tasers. With the 10-year contract that we have, we're getting built-in refreshes. So this will carry us for a solid 10 years. So we won't have to worry about buying new equipment that becomes outdated because everything will have built-in refreshes with it. In year 6 or 7, depending on how the in-car camera technology is, there may be some updates to routers or cradle points at that time, but it'll all seamlessly integrate. The one thing that's kind of exciting that we had them out at our training center for a demo the other day that a lot of other agencies came out to is virtual reality training is going to be a big component of that we won't have. That will go through everything from in-progress calls to de-escalation, talking suspects down, dealing with mental health crises, crisis intervention training. So not only will we have reality-based training at our training center, we'll also have virtual reality training with the goggles. They're much more portable, so we could do it at the station or at our training center. There's other components of this program where now if somebody wanted to submit us a Ring video, doorbell video of a crime, we have to retrieve that, then download it to a server, then burn it to a DVD and put it into our evidence system. Now they'll be able to, an officer with a department-issued cell phone will be able to send them a link, they'll download that Ring video to a link, and it goes straight into evidence.com storage, so it eliminates a lot of manpower time, dropping evidence and doing media cards. So there's a lot of technology advances there that's going to really hopefully streamline us on that.
Is there anything that you are not doing in this bid that, what's the walk away that you could have considered and didn't?
I think the only thing we didn't really look at was the drone part. That would be one more enhancement that we're looking at, but that's something that we're still working on, is the drone technology on that.
Okay.
I think we've gotten everything else that.
Is that something that can be added into the?
Yes, down the road, yes, it could be.
Commissioner McCarley.
Who else uses this system? Like, what other agencies are you aware of?
There are a lot. Pinellas County just recently went in with Axon and went to, I think it was over 600 systems. 800 body cam, in-car, and the new taser. Pasco County Sheriff's Office, Orange County Sheriff's Office, Miami-Dade PD. The taser, less lethal weapon, is pretty much the industry standard that everybody uses. Body cam wise, those agencies I mentioned, University of Florida, I think Ocala, but there's several of them out there that are using that where the taser and the body cam integrate together. Yes. Yep.
One of the great advantages to this is that it addresses the 10-year period of time, because so many people were concerned about the costs over time rising dramatically.
Yes.
And this secures that term. Commissioner McLeod.
Thank you. Thank you for your work on this. I know this has been many months and hours of research and probably negotiations. And I was curious about the auto redaction software piece with artificial intelligence, and if you could explain that a little bit. I know that's one of, when you get from a public records standpoint,
yes,
it's one of the issues that comes up, and just in the body camera debate about the time it can take to, if you have a records request and you have video, and having someone to go through and say, can we release this or not?
Yes, there's two pieces there. There's auto transcription, which the cameras will have artificial intelligence in them that will actually can auto transcribe the event onto paper. And the accuracy rate is fairly decent. We would still have somebody listen to that to make sure the work is proper. The second part of that is the redaction software, where if we conducted a traffic stop and we were releasing it to the public and there's certain people in the video that we didn't want or didn't need to be, their picture didn't need to be released, we can blur that out. And then the technology will basically follow that person throughout the entire video with their face blurred out. So there is still quite a bit of time, because we'll have more videos, more public records requests, but that kind of technology will be available in part of the software.
And reduces the need to do a lot of other things you would have had to have done manually.
Yes.
Do you see any unintended consequences? So as far as intelligence, gathering intelligence from a crime or anything like that, where you have cameras on, and who dictates when the cameras are turned on and when they're turned off? And do you have policies and operational procedures for that? And what does that look like?
Policies are the next big task. Well, we were waiting for this to see if it gets approved, and once that happens, there are several model policies out there. International Association of Chiefs of Police has a model policy. We have that one already we're looking at. Cape Coral PD has been a long time body-worn camera agency, so we've got a few agencies we've already have all their policies we're looking at, and we'll form a group and start looking at that. And the in-car cameras are very customizable, so you can set triggers on when they turn on to record. There's a mute button for muting if you need to, and then there's some state statutes that also, as far as exemptions on what can be released, we can follow those state statutes for protection as well.
Other questions, Commissioner Music?
So the 10-year contract for 938, and then our total of $1,041,041. There's no, on the 938, there's no, over 10 years, there's no increase, there's no inflationary cost, there's no nothing. For 10 years, they're not increasing. I mean, that seems crazy.
I might refer to Mr. Brossard on that one.
I mean,
Yeah.
let's rewind 10 years. What is the same cost, and who's ever locked in a 10? I mean, and I'm sure it happens. That's my big skepticism is the economics at this point, right? We're going to do it, so
Right. The initial conversations were 5-year contracts, and then we knew in year 6 if we were going to re-up, we knew there was going to be cost. Axon's already told us come January 2022 they'll have another cost increase. That's why we were trying to work towards before the end of the year. And then every year they always have an increase, but when we talked to them in initial talks, and Mr. Brossard offered the 10-year deal and further discussions, and they were okay with it being a flat.
So a lot of this stuff is going to be on their cloud service. Is that how that works?
Yes. Evidence.com is proprietary to Axon. So instead of having on-premise servers, and right now we have some on-premise servers, we have some that's on DVD and elsewhere on media cards. Now everything will go to Evidence.com and be on cloud storage.
Okay, and then this is including the car cameras as well, correct?
Yes, sir.
We currently are flipping those when we get a new vehicle, right? So how does that, because there's got to be a budget savings, right? Because when we get a vehicle, we're not going to be purchasing those, correct?
The prior cars was a 7-year life cycle, and this is a 10-year contract. So when we do the swap out, it'll cover that.
Okay.
That's the year 6, 7 you're talking about?
Yes.
Possibly?
Yes.
I mean, this is what you guys are going to do. You think this is a good deal?
Well, it's certainly the company that rolls all this together. It makes it seamless to integrate, and that's a big portion of the drawback of that originally was the manpower it would take to process all this and go through the public records, and that they built a better mousetrap that they can do it. So.
Well, the downside of giving one company everything is the downside that you've just given one company everything.
Yes. Right.
So that, I don't know that that's necessarily a concern, but it's, when they're controlling the cloud and all of that stuff, that could, so, I'm sorry,
No, you're good. I was just trying to make sure he saw me. Sometimes he's on opposite ends.
You need a player.
I think the city manager.
If you turn away from him, then you don't have to keep asking, you just keep talking.
I think the city manager and Mike Brossard had a comment. I just, kind of big picture, to me, this looks like technologically speaking, it's a big step up from what we currently have in terms of systems, even body cameras aside. So I know it's expensive, but there's a lot of, it seems like leading edge technology that other agencies are using that now we'll have as well.
Yeah. So you would be, I think I'm taking your question, are you enthusiastic about that? Is that your question?
It's just more of a comment, just from looking at from the outside and the systems that we have and what this will allow us to do on multiple fronts, things that we currently can't.
Mr. Reed.
Thank you. So we're going to need 2 or 3 more employees?
We're asking for 2, yes.
2, okay.
Yes, sir.
And are we going to get, and I didn't see it, how many tasers are we going to get? I know we asked we're going to get 240, we're getting 250, is that what we're doing?
We asked for 240 originally, and through negotiations, it's now 250.
Okay, and then the body cameras going to be 200 or?
250.
250 as well.
250 as well, and then the automobiles, 160 or 165?
165.
Okay. Will we have any spares?
Yes, it's built into the contract on ratios. So we will have, for the 250 body cams, we will have 8 spares. And then we will have a couple spares for AIM cars. And then with the 10-year warranties, if one goes down, we send that back to Axon for repair or replacement. And then we grab a spare and assign it out.
Yeah, I was reading that there's different add-on features that you can get. I'm just wondering, I know typically you build a home, you do a change order. All of a sudden, we're going to be at $2 million. But I know there's add-on features that you can do. I just didn't know what we anticipated any kind of add-on features where our costs may radically increase.
I don't foresee any now. I mentioned drones may be an add-on, down the road, but everything that is bulletized in your memo is what we're getting that could have been add-ons because they basically have a package A, B, and C. And the one that we negotiated for is the one that has everything that we feel we needed.
So we're getting those add-ons already in place, and that's what I was reading. I was just getting confirmation, I guess you should say.
Yes, sir.
We're getting the best mousetrap out there, per se, that was available for this particular amount of funds.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
City Manager Strauss.
Yeah, I just wanted, just some of Commissioner Music's questions and comments. I would like to recognize Chief Garcia and Assistant Chief Lehman, Lieutenant Fitzgerald, Mike Brossard, and our public safety IT technicians. They've done a masterful job negotiating this contract with Axon. To the points that were made, there is some concern, and there was initially when there was some discussion about going from a 5 to a 10-year contract. But when they were able to lock in the pricing for that amount of time, then the concern was, well, but does that mean 10 years from now our equipment's going to be, outdated and 10 years old? So to get the change out, in year 6 or 7, I think you heard from Chief Lehman also, will extend the life of the program. And, going with one company, yeah, it can be a concern, but obviously, going with the full package. And as you've heard this morning, the package is much more robust than was even initially considered, and the team was able to come in below, what was budgeted. So it's been a fantastic job, and going with the one company brings in some of that savings versus piecemealing it out, and we probably would not then have been under budget, and we would have had the additional cost of integrating the different, systems coming from the different companies. So they've done a tremendous job to come in under budget, getting what will be received out of the package that's been negotiated.
Finance Director Brossard, comments.
Thank you. We went into this very skeptical about the idea of having one system. The chiefs did it, and I did as well. But what I learned was Axon is similar to an Oracle or a Microsoft or somebody that's so well established throughout the country that allayed a lot of my fears. As the chiefs would explain, these are the groups that have had these for a long period of time, and so the integration between the two. But I think to what Chief Lehman said, one of the things that there were two pieces that I walked away with thinking, wow, I didn't realize that our officers are going to get this great benefit from this replacement system. One is license plate readers. All vehicles are going to have license plate readers, so they're going to be provided very important information that, in my mind, that wasn't something that was part of this whole system initially. So that's a nice add-on feature that the chiefs had talked about that was part of the ideal scenario if they could get all of these things within budget. That's huge. That's going to help our officers a great way. But the other part that Chief Lehman talked about was the VR, the virtual reality training that's available for dealing with folks with mental illness. That can't be reiterated enough, that how important that is for our officers, because nowadays they're put in those situations and we don't really have that type of training for them. So for all of them to be able to be a part of that, I think is huge. So it's a coup, it really is.
This system also is an in-car download, correct?
Yes, everything will download to a server, but they have what's called a cradle point, and it can either connect Wi-Fi or cellular to download.
And which saves labor every day.
Yes.
So everything that we have been able to incorporate then enhances skills and minimizes labor investment in this system, which is one of the reasons that you are high proponents of it. I just want to make sure that you guys are wonderful at stating the facts. I just want to make certain that you don't feel like we're missing something, or even more, that I'd love to know that this is an enthusiastic enhancement from your perspective, if it is in fact that. And maybe you can make a comment to that.
I'd love to see some enthusiasm.
Well, it's how he operates. And so what I love about Chief is that he's reliable right here. Any comments, sir?
There's certainly some components to it that will definitely enhance our operations. There's some training opportunities through virtual reality that'll better inoculate our folks to the stuff they deal with out in the field. So there's certainly some great benefit there. Bringing all this stuff together will certainly save a lot of manpower and time. So we're definitely getting a lot for, although a lot of money is what's being spent. We're getting a lot for that money. And wrangling in a bunch of loose ends and bringing them into one functional system.
Thank you. And that was enthusiastic.
It was. I noticed that. I saw it. I felt that.
Yeah, Commissioner McLeod.
Chief, if you had a top concern about the implementation and rollout of this, what would that be?
It'll be public education. We'll be watching one-dimensional video in a three-dimensional world, and that's huge that we're able to convey that to the public, that you need to see. You're seeing what's happening, but you're not feeling what's happening. You're not sensing with all your senses of what is happening. You're only seeing the visual aspect of what's happening. You're not getting that other senses that the officer is dealing with out in the field when these confrontations happen. So nothing that can't be overcome. Virtual reality will be an opportunity probably to help educate the public with that as well. But there is a huge educational campaign that will come with this.
It's your world, it's the PR problem.
Thank you. I have two questions. They're kind of related but unrelated. Is it true when you go through training that you'll get tased? Everybody else get tased?
Yes, sir.
You can volunteer. I volunteered once and they said, we don't want to hear you cuss. I said, okay.
And then secondly, while you're here, I guess we've got some new employees coming from the north. I was reading in somewhere last night that fortunately we haven't had to do this, but Tennessee is offering people in the north free relocations if they will come down, that they're been compromised if they don't want to do one thing or another to keep their job. Or how are we doing on getting new employees from that standpoint?
We're full. Now that is not full on the street. That's full on the table of organizations. That a lot of them have to go through training to get them qualified here. But as you might have heard, we hired 15 out of New York City. We picked up several more through other states that's come down. But they're all in different levels of training before we get them out on the street.
How long before they'll be fully implemented in?
We're hoping February, March, we see the bulk of them out in the field. So.
Most of them probably have several years of experience.
Yes, sir, and that's the benefit of hiring officers from another agency. It's a very short crossover to get them up to standard here.
Cool. What were their views on body cams?
Some of them that are coming, they're coming from agencies that have had them, so they're used to working in that environment.
Okay, all right. We know it's been a ton of work for you, and we'll move on this, and I appreciate you getting this together. Appreciate all the people who worked to get this contract pulled together. Recognize it's a gargantuan task, and we do, and that is a paradigm-shifting moment if it gets approved as you have proposed. And so we don't minimize that and know that as when you think about the work ahead this next year, it redefines a lot of your lives, and the public education will be a very important piece of that as we go along, and that there is not one silver, I won't use silver bullet in this case, there's not one option that is always satisfying for everything that we do, and there are always other components of consideration, certainly in what you engage with every day, that are critical for people to appreciate, and the decisions that are made are wonderful, and we are so grateful for this department. And so we are all, I personally am enthusiastic that I think this is also a department that can do a great job, if approved, of integrating this system, and we thank you for that. All right, next item.
That's all for the regular agenda. We have a couple items under utility. We do have a utility committee meeting coming up at 11, so at your pleasure as to whether you want to hear anything about that now or wait until...
Can we just do that at the meeting?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, all right.
That's all I have.
All right, anything from the commissioners? Anything like, yes, Commissioner McCarley.
I have a list, hold on.
I thought we were going to get out early.
It's not that bad. I won't be superfluous with my language, I promise. I just had a couple questions questions, and these are staff, and you can circle back to me. I'm looking at Sean and Emily. So behind Union, let me preface this. So I think Jason Woolley was going to give us an inventory of parking around the city of Lakeland, like different parking garages or spaces that the city has throughout. And this sort of follows that. This made me think of that as a reminder, if we can get that inventory of what that is. Because I had a constituent call yesterday about a bus behind Union Hall that's been there continually. I don't know if somebody's living out of it, but part of that parking lot is city, I guess.
3 of their spaces they have, I think.
They have 3, Union Hall has 3, but the rest of that parking is considered
Right.
city.
Yes.
So we had a question on how that's managed, if there's someone who is there continually, and I know it's not a paid parking space, but I think they've talked to LPD about it, and LPD's like, well, it's a city lot, so trying to figure out how that all works. And that's all hearsay, that's just from a constituent. So I don't need an answer right now, I'm just putting it on your list, and I'll circle back with you next week. The second thing is the parking lot by Gray Robinson it's on Tennessee and Walnut. Is that a city lot? Yes.
Yep.
Okay, so how, do you have to be permitted to park there, so who parks there?
So I'm just want to pause because, we remember Angelo. So we have the new Angelo.
Oh, yeah.
Jeff, he's in attendance. So we have Jeff Gregg, and he's right there from Public Works.
Yay.
So he can tell us about, if you want to talk about Walnut. We just talked about this last week or the week before.
I just want to know how the permitting is. I don't need a long dissertation about it, like who's permitted to park there and when is it getting access?
She's really nice, though.
Very. If music said that, you wouldn't have said, he's really nice.
That's right. There's a difference. Okay, gotta set that bar early.
Generally, during the day, Monday through Friday during the day, we lease spaces within these lots, and that they do come through and that they'll check and make sure that someone is permitted, and if not, then they'll get a nice little note saying, hey, this is permitted only, and then if they happen to do it again, then they'll get a little more
aggressive,
strenuous note that involves a fine. But that generally we want to force compliance rather than just penalize them immediately. But we do check them several times a day. The lot over there in Tennessee, I believe that there are
85 total spaces.
85 spaces, 53 of which are leased currently. And that means there's some vacancies over there.
Yeah. That's the question, is the vacancies over there.
Yeah. There are generally vacancies in most of our facilities, that even in the downtown garages where we rent those out on a monthly basis, we're having internal conversations about whether or not we should open some of that to daily or hourly, just from the aspect of, having a garage that has 300 spaces in it that 100 of them are filled.
Right.
Doesn't make sense necessarily.
Thank you. It was more of a question about just the vacancies that are there, and then because I think it goes back to Commissioner Madden's point too of the bridge to nowhere, the bicycle bridge to nowhere. We see these lots and we don't know that they're necessarily city lots, and then there are empty spaces, and we get asked about parking all the time, and so it's like this confluence of confusion. So if we had a master plan, if Jason or your department can provide us an inventory all over of what's leased and what's not leased, and so we know what's there, that'd be awesome, and it could even be visual. That'd be great if you could share that.
I'd also like to eventually put together kind of a master parking guidance system.
That'd be awesome.
So that when you're coming down to these areas, you'll know where these lots are, whether it be through an app or whatever.
That'd be great.
But we're kind of at having internal discussions that I've not included my superiors in yet, just kind of at the parking level saying, how can we improve some of these things?
That'd be great. And I am nice and welcome over. I'm just trying to get through because if I talk too much, I get in trouble. If I don't talk, I get in trouble. So it's just universal. Yeah.
If you are moving on, we have been having those discussions recently. There's been some discussion with the CRA about the potential for signage and counts of spaces used within some of the garages. So that predictability of parking could be improved. And Emily, I think, probably threw those numbers out because we've also been looking with the squeeze now operational, where we might have some opportunities to almost create like some park and ride areas where people could park Park, jump on the squeeze, and, you know, and we timed it. Actually, I was with Julie Townsend and some others, and so we went down to the lot you're asking about, and we drove the route up to Munn Park, and it was like less than 2 minutes. So you could park there, jump on a squeeze, and get to Munn Park in less than 2 minutes. So we're looking at some options, and Julie and I have been having some discussions about that, and staff as well.
Well, and that's what, I had my director meeting yesterday with Transit, because I meet with them once a month and have a team meeting with them as the Transit chair, and so that's exactly why I was asking. I just didn't want to get in the weeds of it. But that's why I was asking about that lot specifically. We already had ridership from the South State Bank Building for lunch, and that was really exciting for them to link into the squeeze, which is my next point. Can we move on from parking?
Sure.
So the squeeze for everybody, for Transit, started this week. It was launched on Monday. I think most of you know that, and that is the open air golf cart that's going around downtown for lunch times from Monday through Thursday, and then this weekend it starts this evening, or this afternoon, Friday. It'll run from 3 o'clock to 10 o'clock tonight. 10:30 actually, hop on, hop off. You can get on the app and pay for your ride, and then 4:30 to midnight tomorrow for Saturday. So Friday and Saturday will be evening accessibilities on the squeeze, and then Monday through Thursday is lunchtime, 11:30 to 1:30. So it picks up at different spaces around town, and you can hop on and go to the joiner, just like Sean was saying, people hopping on over by Walnut. We did a test run last week. We amped up the speed, because when I rode it was a little bit slower. We were at 17 minutes for the loop instead of 12. So it's really interesting. We're really excited about it. We want to see ridership. We're hoping through the holidays we'll see a lot of good ridership on it, and have people be able to park somewhere, and then if they don't want to walk, they can hop on the squeeze and access public transit. And so we're really excited about it. This is another transportation thing. So Highway 33 and our interchange, I got a call this week. You got a call too. We had to talk to the same person about the utility easements on the 33 and I-4, and how that's not quite ready yet for if DOT can program the I-4 interchange segment. I just wanted to find out, not right now, but from Ellie's perspective of what's been moved and what hasn't been moved and what is left to do on that, so that we can figure that out.
How much is in budget, how much is in capital?
Exactly. Because we don't have to right now. Let's just put it on hold.
We'll talk about it later.
Yeah, we can talk about it later. I just want everybody to know that I'm asking about it, and that from a TPO standpoint, we're talking about it, and so we're on top of it.
And if I may, just real quick on that, and we won't go into too much detail, but we've known for about a year now, with a conversation that I had with DOT, that, you know, we've got some utility infrastructure in the ground up there. Right. And so we were asked about the opportunity to advance our funding and planning for relocation there, and we were able to do that to try to stay ahead of the opportunities there for 33. So we can go into more details about that when the time comes, but we certainly have been working on that for at least a year, and are positioned to be able to accommodate any advancement that might happen to see improvements there.
So I think we just need to probably have hardcore facts on what is moved and what isn't moved, because that was my impression, that we had been working diligently on it the last year and a half, and there will seem to be questions, but we can talk offline. But I just want my fellow commissioners to know that that's one of my priorities as well. And then the last thing, I'm so glad y'all are here. It's the last thing I want to ask about is I had a drone in my backyard.
Crash?
No, visiting my pool. And so I called the non-emergency number, and I was like, hey, because I pulled in my driveway and I heard this humming, and I'm like, there's a humming. And it was a friendly little drone, I'm assuming friendly, over my property, over my pool, below my fence line, floating around. So I called our non-emergency number. They were very gracious and said, we can send somebody out. Well, then I said, okay, no rush. There are other more important things for LPD. And so I went up to my second story and crawled out on my roof line and saw the gentleman that was controlling the drone on the property behind mine that sits on Beacon, and he was doing drone activity for realtors, which I said, well, that's lovely. He said, I'll give you my card, which he did. And I said, but you're below my line. You're below my fence line. So I don't know the ramifications of drone on private property and what that's like, but it really creeped me out, just A. And he's like, well, I'm taking pictures of this other property for real estate. So I just throwing that out there. I don't know if anybody else has experienced something like that. And it kind of just rattled me a little bit, because it literally was hovering around my pool area, and it could look into my like my family room, basically.
That's when you
So that
want to get
stressed me
your
out.
pool net.
I couldn't get out of the car fast enough. I videoed it. I mean, I put it on my phone and I videoed the whole thing. And I have the card of the company that was doing the drone activity. And he was nice. I'm like, sir, he was looking around. I'm like, I'm up here. I'm like, hey,
I'm
what's going on? What's going on? And he's like, oh, I'm taking pictures. I'm like, but you were on my side. So I don't know if, I'm just
What are
throwing
the
that out
rules?
there. Yeah, what are the guidelines for that?
It's a trespass for one thing.
Yeah, there's certainly, if you get down into the personal space of the property, there's a trespass issue there.
What about a BB gun? That's what my son wanted to do.
That's not going to be enough power.
Like what's on the other side of the water hose.
Then you get in trouble for
So
that.
it is trespassing.
Yes.
That's so fascinating.
Coming down
Okay.
inside your fence like that.
Yeah, this is a whole new world. Like, I would have never thought about what airspace belongs to what and how that, I mean, it's kind of crazy. So, but y'all were lovely. I called back and I said, I talked to the guy that has the drone. Don't send anybody. And they were very nice, but they're like, that's kind of a new, I've not had calls about that before.
So, it's becoming more common. I actually personally saw one over the terrace, and they were, when they were renovating it.
Oh,
I thought at first we had a technological peeping Tom there. So
It's a little creepy, right? It's just a little creepy. It's a little disarming.
But, we tracked it back and found
Sorry,
out it was the construction folks using it, so it's just becoming more prevalent.
Yeah, and I know people use it, like Bonnet Springs, we use it. We use it for our board meetings. People fly over and they show us the progress, like daily almost, of what's going on at the park, and I think it's really helpful. And I'm glad to see that this contract for you guys is open to that later on, amenable to that later on. But that was a little...
But Mike can speak to this too, but they use it for roofing a lot.
Yeah, we do it, and when we do it prior to and after.
Good idea.
But what we do is we actually didn't on your neighbors that we just did. But we always reach out to the neighbors on either side, just let them know that we're doing it just for that very. Yeah, I don't need that headache.
It was weird.
Yeah.
Commissioner Reed.
Thank you. For everybody's watching, if anybody's watching, today and tomorrow we have the Air and the Automotive Show going out at the Sun and Fun that people need to go to if they don't have anything else going on. And I think the Snow Fest is going on Saturday. Two of them. Somebody may want to take their kids to some big event down at the Coronation.
As a non-perishable food item, please.
And they're good. I apologize for, I've had some issues yesterday. I flew out of town and couldn't get back in time, but I went to watch the parade on the TV channel and it wasn't on.
Correct.
Is it not on? We don't tape it
No,
that way?
it's video on demand right now. What happened is, and thank you for this segue, I was going to ask if I could speak, so thank you for the segue. So, as you know, we partner with PGTV. They have a production truck, and it's a great partnership. It's something we don't have to go invest in $250,000 piece of equipment that they already have. It's a great relationship. So what we utilize is what a lot of the network television stations utilize today. We don't use satellite anymore. We use a thing called a Terra deck, which uses cell phone card technology. It usually works flawlessly. We tested it weeks in advance. It worked great. It was working great until the fireworks went off, and then all the broadband with all the cell phones out there with recording dropped, and our signal dropped, and we were unable to air it live. However, we did record it. It's video on demand, and anyone can watch it now, but we need more cell phone towers.
Okay, good luck with that.
But and I say that, facetiously, but it's the Teradek system of the cell phone technology as soon as that parade started. And even we had a few of the networks tell us they were one of the Tampa networks, same thing happened to them. They were trying to do a live broadcast back to their station and just dropped.
So for events like that, in the near term, you may need to have a satellite link. Is that possible?
Do we want to? I don't think it.
No, we're not spending the money.
Right. And that's where I was going to go. Yeah. As a good steward of the taxpayers' dollars, I would not come to you and say we need, a $50,000, $60,000 piece of equipment on one end and a $50,000 piece of equipment on the other end for one event. So what will most likely take place? We love being at the Amtrak station. It's a great vantage point. It works
great for the broadcast, and you're going to see if you watch it on video on demand, this was probably our best broadcast ever. The set looked great. I want to, applaud the communications staff. It was beautiful. The PGTV and everything they did, it was probably the best. No drama except for the drop of the signal. It was fantastic. So what's going to probably take place, we're going to have to go back to a city facility where we can get on our network just because of all the cell phones out there. So we'll probably end up in front of the fire department like we used to, 5 years ago before we went to Amtrak station. But with, the increased cell phone usage, as soon as the fireworks went off, it was like it just dropped. So I apologize for the inconvenience, but it is available on video on demand. It really, I'm not kidding, it's probably our best broadcast ever.
Yeah, I'm trying to watch the last one. You get to hear Kevin sing?
I do sing a little bit.
I have one more.
Yes, sir.
Is there somebody from the utility, who's the utility department here?
From electric or from water?
Electric.
Okay.
And I got a question from a constituent, and I didn't know who to ask, and I thought Joel, didn't want to pester him today, but somebody had a tenant move out, left an unpaid utility bill, they sent it to the property owner. What's that protocol?
Commissioner Reed, it depends on if the bill is in the tenant's name, then it would stay with the tenant's name, but a lot of times the landowner or the property owner doesn't have that happen, and it's the utilities it's in the property owner or the landlord's name, so it would follow the property owner, and then the landowner would have to take recourse against the tenant to recoup that.
Okay, so
it just depends on the circumstances. I don't know what the issue was.
I don't either, but they seem to think it was, the people had it turned on, and they had it turned off, but there was some use during that little lapse, and they got a bill, and they tried to give the people the power, Lakeland, their new people's address, and they said that's not our problem if you got the bill, that's my understanding. But I can find out more about it. But
name of account, and it would depend on who had the account for those said hours. And
thank you.
Commissioner McLeod.
Thank you, Mayor. I just have a question for Sean. The economic incentive discussion that we had a while back, what's our next step on that? Do we come back? Is there a follow-up workshop or discussion that's scheduled?
Yes, we have one-on-ones with commissioners next week. You'll be getting the agenda later today.
Okay.
And that will be one of the topics for discussion with the intent to then bring it back to the commission once we've had a chance to have some discussions and kind of figure out which options need to be prepared based on the discussion we had at the workshop.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Any other comments? Commissioner Madden.
Thank you, Mayor. So I would swear it must be Green Hydrogen Week. I have no idea why I had 3 different conferences all overlapping this week, but my mind is swirling. First, it started out with Realizing North America's Green Hydrogen Economy, a 2-day event on Tuesday, Wednesday, which then overlapped, but I had to pivot to the hope and the hype of the H2 economy, which the mayor was on. I went through the participants, I'm like, the mayor's on this with me.
It was fascinating.
Isn't he amazing?
He takes a very complex subject and makes it so I could understand it. So
I know, but he's brilliant.
But he's brilliant,
the science.
and his vetting, and I'm sure there's some other sides to any expert, but his vetting and his care and grant funding and other sources, practical utilizations, how is this getting paid for?
Yes.
Is extremely thorough as well.
The science and the economics in the full package. I mean, just incredible. And the obstacles and how the EV acceleration based on the infrastructure build out, people have to decide, investors need predictability. Am I going to invest in an EV or a fuel cell small vehicle? I'm going to go with EV because we're already on a roll. We already have the momentum. But on the mid and heavy fleets, the fuel cell and the hydrogen economy will be, and just kind of cool they talked about the steel.
To put that in words that I would understand, only because I was on it, basically they're saying 15, 20 years before you'd ever see hydrogen cells in vehicles. And unless they're large vehicles. And that because it's so inexpensive to do batteries today and that technology is accelerating, that EV is going to be the growth.
And the big thing is, it all depends on basically the demand. I mean, you can't force adoption like with EVs, and you can't force people to produce H2, but as Saudi Arabia is filling their entire, desert with electrolyzers to make it, and if demand increases for the steel industry and for other areas, then, that could accelerate the timeline. So I thought that it was awesome. By yesterday, and of course, after I leave here today, I'll be watching the grand finale at the APPA's Public Power Forward. Like, oh my God, I can't watch anymore. But I also was reminded that I hadn't finished my homework that we had been given by Scott. So I'm like, this must be my weekend reading. As if I haven't had enough all week, my mind might explode. But I think, have y'all been reading? Did y'all read your homework?
It's on my table.
I brought it to remind you. This is your reminder as we go into utility, the homework.
Homework is due in January.
Yes. So we have to avoid a climate disaster, and we are on it here in Lakeland, Florida. And how proud, Scott, how proud are we that when we watch these things, and you hear from utilities all across the country. Now, except for California, because they are like always far advanced, with all the stuff. And they have the big salt caverns, and they can store it and all that. So let them go be the bleeding edge. And we will be right after them with all their best practices and all the lessons learned. But it is really exciting that we have on order these turbines that can already be injectable with hydrogen 20% day one. And with a company that was a little bit of a risk, meaning, first one in the United States, but who is scrambling to get them to 100% in Germany, and because Europe is pressing hard with these initiatives. And so, super cool subject. Scott is awesome. Ellie is awesome. It was difficult to decommission that coal plant, with regard to, all the employees that were affected, and certainly we wanted to do that carefully. But strategically, financially, and in line with global, climate goals, we are on the right track and ahead of the game. And just like our fearless leader, Joel Ivey, wants to be the best municipal utility in the country, I think we're on track.
Excellent.
Is that a good
Scott, any comment on that with respect
So
to...
I also get inundated. I keep it on in the background while I continue to do work because there is so much of it, you can get lost in it. So people walk into my office and they go, "Are you on another one?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I really am."
It's moving
So
fast.
it just stays like this the whole time. So I try to catch up as much as I can, but it's a barrage.
Yeah.
And it's constant. And there's a lot of stuff really happening. Come to find out, I was watching one where Canada cannot go EV. Minus 20 degrees and a battery's not going to work.
Oh, wow.
So Canada's like, we can't even touch the EV realm because batteries aren't going to work in the extreme cold. So they're already pushing to go hydrogen. So because they can't go EV.
Okay.
Makes no sense. In the summer, it's fine.
Why
But in
didn't I hear
wintertime,
that,
it's just so
like
cold.
that?
Just so cold, they can't.
You phased out for a minute.
I might have had
That was the third or fourth one. That was a different one.
Oh, it's a different one. Okay, I was like, okay, to hear that. But for us, it's like our evacuation routes.
Yep.
We can't get stuck and not be able to charge our battery, So it's just interesting that the different places have different. Isn't this exciting?
It's
Everybody
different.
wants to go to work.
Chief is really excited.
Let's go.
Chief is so excited. It's enthusiasm.
Commissioner Music.
As I don't share quite the enthusiasm for that, but is that stuff available to watch? Is it just if I need to fast forward, I can?
Give you a report that I have downloaded that I think you'd love. And
That guy was the best. Honestly, out of all the things America do, listen, we will go through all the stuff and tell you the best. And that was
Yeah, I'm a Cliff Notes guy.
He is the best.
And I'm an audiobooks guy, and I did finish the book. So.
Good for you! Woo!
But hey, speaking of EV, when is your truck coming?
Because this is interesting. So he mentioned even in this the F-150 Ford Lightning.
Right.
The F-150 Ford Lightning is an all-electric vehicle. You can actually charge your house. I mean, you charge it from your house, but you can use it in a storm for 3 days, allegedly. The Ford story is that vehicle is probably 9 months out still. New Hampshire and Vermont are going to get the first allocations because they're the greenest states, and so that's what they're following.
So they're not going to work up there, it's cold.
So that I leased a different vehicle. That's my bottom line. So that's why I'm in one. And we probably are not going to see lightnings here for well over a year. There's 120,000 orders for them. Ford's going to increase their production from what they already had allocated towards EV.
Where are they manufactured?
I'm not certain, but Louisville generally. But I'm not certain that's true of the EVs. I'd guess it would be. And the market has moved, and what the graphs all show is how people are moving to electrics. And you see more Teslas around. You see that's more common. But on the other hand, I had some Thanksgiving visitors that came to our house that live in Atlanta that came down in a Tesla. My son-in-law, who bought one and loves using it, that got to Gainesville and were 18th in line at a major charging station where everybody was all full, and you're sitting there waiting to just get through on a day like that, and then had to do it again in Tiffin, and they were only 9th in line on that.
Wow, that's interesting.
And the charge time is about 35 minutes, so just think what that does to your trip in terms of the dependency.
So the adoption rate then causes demand on your charging, and also your mining. The mining's a big issue, so it might accelerate the fuel cell and hydrogen.
There you go. Keep back again. Get down to 15 here.
Gas station.
Okay. Anybody else? Thanks so much. Appreciate your time this morning.